Okay, so I'm now in my shed, and I've started marking out the design for the shield. So I hope you can see that. It's not great light in here. I've got the door open at the minute, so you can see what I'm doing. So again, this is following the size guidelines laid out for shield sizes for Empire. This is going to be a kite shield, and so it follows dimensions laid out in the rules for a kite shield size for Empire. Again, like I've said before, if you're doing something for your own LARP, you need to check your rules for your own LARP to make sure that whatever you're making falls within the sizes of the appropriate shield or weapon that you're making, because otherwise, you know, you could end up being it being rejected in your weapons check. So do make sure that you're doing that. So I've just used a Sharpie to mark this out. This is going to be the first layer. This is obviously that looks like this is going to be the top one, and this is on 10mm foam, and I'll be cutting at least 3 of these. So I'll go ahead and cut this out, and I'll join you in just a second. Okay, so as you can see, I've now cut out 3 of the same shape. So these will later on be glued together to form the shield, but I'm not going to do that quite yet. First of all, I'm going to build the frame. Once I've built the frame, then the first layer will go on top of the frame. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because the frame is going to be give the shield a curve. So to get that curve, it's a lot easier to put the layers onto the frame one at a time, because it's just easier to bend the foam around that curve and get it to glue properly. So once you've done the first one, then the second one will go on the top of the first, and then finally the third one. And then once I've done that, I'll also cut out another shape for the horse's head, which will then form a 4th layer on the top, which will put the horse's head in relief to the rest of the shield. Obviously this will give the top of the shield a bit more rigidity, and make the horse's head sort of pop out from the shield, give it a bit of relief, and just give it that detail, rather than just painting a flat image on the shield. Just gives it a bit more interest. So the next thing I'll be doing is constructing the frame and where the handle goes. So I'll show you that next. We're going to get down to a little bit of gluing. I'm just going to show you on part of the housing for the handle. We're going to just glue a couple of bits together, just showing you how to do that. I'm not going to show you the whole gluing of the whole thing, to be honest with you. It's boring. Once you've got the idea of how things go together, you just repeat it for the rest of the things. Also, it would make this video incredibly long if I did that. So we're going to be using this high strength contact adhesive. I'll be using that for everything that I do with this shield, unless obviously I state otherwise. It's going to be this that I'm using to glue parts together. So it's not exactly pleasant stuff. So I'm wearing gloves, and I have a mask, so if my voice sounds a bit muffled in a minute, that's why. So I'm just going to put my mask on. It's basically it stinks, to be quite honest with you. So it's not very pleasant. The fumes are not going to do you much good. So make sure you're in a well ventilated area, and you're wearing a mask, of course. Right, so I'm just going to use a scrap piece of foam. Make sure your foam is nice and clean and there's no dust on it. And then to join the sections together, you need to apply a thin coat evenly across each surface that you're going to glue. That is quite important, that you have to cover both sides. So. Okay, so make sure you get right to the edges. Okay, and then the other piece. I'm just using a scrap piece of foam as a glue spreader. You can buy proper glue spreaders, but I've got so much little pieces of foam lying around. I just tend to use those. Could only go in the bin anyway, so they make really good spreaders. Okay, so once you've got a nice even coat across both surfaces, you then have to leave them to dry. So I know it might sound a little bit counterintuitive for using glue, the fact that you've got to leave it dry before you actually glue them together, but this is how contact adhesive works. So each side has a very thin layer, they become dry or well, tacky really, and then you can glue them together. Quick note on that, once you put these two sides together, they are never coming apart again without ruining the two pieces of foam. So be absolutely sure that you want to glue them and before you put them together, and when you're putting them together you must be really accurate in your placement, because once you've placed them they're not coming apart. So I'm going to leave these to dry for a minute and then we'll sandwich them together. And okay, so it's been a couple of minutes now, and the glue is dry, well, it's tacky. Obviously don't touch it because it's just going to stick to your hands. So we're going to now glue these two pieces together. So you need to be very careful when you're doing this, and make sure that your pieces are going to line up. I've taken my mask off now because the fumes, I've closed the tin and the fumes are gone. So we're going to try and align this up very carefully. There we go. And once you've done that, give it a really good pressing in. So what you really want to do is once these parts are glued together, before you start putting any sort of stress on these parts, leave them to dry overnight. To be honest with you, that won't come apart now, but just to make doubly sure, best to leave them overnight. So I'm going to carry on and make up the rest of this piece now, and when I've done, I'll show you the final thing. Okay, so I'm just going to sand these blocks down just to make them a little bit neater. Mask, gloves. You don't really need to do this. You can use sandpaper. This is just quicker, really. Okay. So you also may have noticed I've put a curve on the one side of that, which will find it, which will match up. There we go. There we go. Which will eventually match up with the curve of the shield. Just means that it's just going to have a bigger contact surface. More contact surface is always good. So I'm going to go and do the other one, and then I'll show you the full construction of the sort of handle rig. Right, while I'm here, a quick word on sanders. So obviously you can see this is a belt sander. I got this from Lidl's, I believe. Yeah, Lidl's. It was incredibly cheap, but the most important thing about it is it's got an attachment that attaches it to the belt. Attaches it to the bench, technically upside down, and this allows you to do obviously a flatbed for sanding. To be quite honest with you, something like this, if you're going to make swords, you know, anything bigger than a dagger really, you're going to need something like this. It just speeds the whole process up and just gives you a better finish. Trying to do it by hand, you tend to sort of get a wibbly wobbly sort of blade. You know, some can look fine, especially if you're doing like I don't know, if you're doing an orc blade, that can look absolutely fine. You know, it looks like it's been roughly cast. But if you want to do something a bit finer, you are going to need a belt sander. So like I said, I picked this one up really cheap. I think it's about £30, something like that, from Lidl. You can get them really cheap. It doesn't need to be that powerful, because after all, you're only sanding foam. So this one is absolutely fine. But like I say, you need one with an attachment that will clamp it to your bench. If you haven't got that, it's no good. Yeah, that's sanders. So the cross pieces are going to give the shield its curve and obviously help make it more sturdy. This is all dry fitted. I haven't actually glued anything together yet. Just so you can see what I was doing really. So yeah, the handle goes through the middle. You've got the two cross pieces that are either side of the housing for each end. So once that's glued up, it's pretty good. The glue holds it really well. And this curve that goes around here will be where the actual face of the shield goes. So it's essentially it's upside down at the moment. So you may have seen me, I did a little bit of sanding earlier, which also curved the tops of these so that it follows the same, or roughly follows the same curve of the cross pieces, which will again follow the same curve as the shield. So I'll just turn this over, so I'll bear in mind nothing's glued yet. And so that is going to be the back of the shield. So essentially that is where you're going to be, where your handle is. So I've actually got quite small hands, but I've left enough room there so you can slide your hand up and down slightly, and obviously anybody with bigger hands or wearing a gauntlet, you've got plenty of room there. And of course where the workbench is, that is where your hand is going to fit through. So there's about 30mm between the handle and the bench. However, I think it's going to need a little bit more room, so what I'm going to do is cut a hole in the first layer of the shield, which is a common thing. You'll see that on a lot of shields. Usually where the boss is, this shield hasn't got one, but usually where the boss is, there's like a cutaway behind, just so you can get your hand in, and it certainly doesn't damage the structure of the shield or at all. I did the same sort of thing on the previous one and had no problems at all. Of course, you could, if you wanted to avoid that, do more layers of foam, which would lift the handle further away from the shield. But to be quite honest with you, it means that you're going to have to use more foam, and of course there's a cost involved with that. So actually, by taking away one piece, it just seems like makes more sense to me. Again, this is only how I do it. You know, I'm no expert. It works for me. You know, you need to do what's going to work for you. So yeah, so I'm going to glue this up, and then we'll have a look at putting the first layer of the shield on top. Okay, so I've left the cross braces to dry overnight, so they're fully glued. The next thing I'm going to do is glue in the handle. It's really easy, just plenty of contact adhesive on either end, and push them through into the housings. Just a quick note, you need to make sure that you don't leave too much space. The foam will sort of expand around the handle, so make sure that it's a very tight fit, and you need a bit of effort to sort of push it in. That way it won't move, because one of the problems you can get with this handle on a shield is that the bond with the glue might break, and then the handle will turn round, which can make it very awkward for actually fighting with it, and is possibly a potential weapons check fail as well. Okay, so I'm going to go and assemble this piece, and then we'll move on to the next. Okay, so while the handle's drying, I've taken the opportunity to cut the hole in the centre of the first layer. That's really just to give a little bit more clearance for the handle. So I'm going to now just glue up this sheet along with the handle. So I'm going to run lines of glue along these two marks here, which are where the handle's supports are going to go, and in these areas here. So it'd be the same as before, so I'll give it a thin coat of contact adhesive on this side. The handle will also have a thin coat of contact adhesive on that side, and then carefully press the two together. Again, so just to mention that once you've pressed them together, they're not going to come apart without damaging the shield, so it's really important that you make sure that the position is right first time, and that you've marked out correctly. So make sure you've marked your where it's going to go. Try and only glue in the areas that you need to have the glue. It will make things easier later on when it comes to latexing, because latex doesn't really sit very well over glue spots. So it's quite important to do that. So I'm going to attach the handle very shortly, and once I've done that, I'll be back. Alright, so I'm just going to apply the glue to the frame now. Again, just make sure you're wearing gloves and give everything a nice thin coat. So make sure you give it really spread it to all the edges. And you don't want a thick gloopy layer. You want it thin. It's not the volume of the glue; it's just that makes it stick. It's the surface area, really, I guess. Having it thick doesn't make it stick any stronger, if that makes sense. So just a good even coat all the way over is what you want. Okay, so I'm going to leave that to dry for a couple of minutes, and then I will stick that to the first layer of the shield. Just a moment. just while I'm doing this, again, I'm going to mention it because it is really important, especially with large flat areas. You need to make sure that the glue is evenly spread everywhere. You don't want little spots that have got no glue on them, because essentially what will happen then is there'll be a little bit of area where the layers are not laminated together properly, and then over time that can separate more and more and more, and before you know it, your shield is, or sword for that matter, whatever it is that you're making, has delaminated. And again, that is another reason that weapons and shields can fail weapons check. So yeah, just make sure that you do that. Another good tip as well is, if you are a LARPer, which I'm presuming you're going to be by watching this video, find the weapons checkers and have a good chat with them. I've got a friend of mine at Empire, shout out to Rob, who I've had a good chat with about weapons in general. He's given me an awful lot of advice, particularly over Messenger and Facebook. You know, he's a weapons checker, so he knows exactly what he's talking about, and he gave me some really good advice about just doing things that are going to get my stuff passed. And so when I went to Empire last, I had a little chat with him, and he was really pleased to hear that all my stuff had passed weapons check. So yeah, use the resources you've got. So, you know, go up to your weapons checkers, talk to them. You know, if you've made something, bring it along. Look, if it doesn't pass, they'll give you some advice on what it is that's wrong with it. You know, next time you'll get that right. Although, of course, I will say that mistakes with making weapons and shields can be costly. So at the moment, I'm going to estimate that, this is only a guess, that just in materials alone, obviously this is not my time included, but just in materials alone, this shield is going to cost, I don't know, probably around about £50 ish materials. So I have, obviously, I've bought the foam as in glue and etc. I've had the latex for a while, so I didn't actually have to buy that this time. But you know, if you take a proportion of the cost of that, the glue, obviously the foam is quite expensive. It does rack up. So I have actually probably got enough foam from the foam that I purchased to make this, to churn out a couple of swords as well. But to be able to do this, I had to buy the foam, and so obviously adding that cost on, it cost me about £50. You can pick up a fully made, ready to go, weapons check, passed shield at most LARPs for around £50. And essentially the way that they do it is because they're making them in bulk. You know, they won't make one shield, they'll make 10. And of course, when you're buying foam in bulk, it gets cheaper. And when you're buying glue and all the other bits and pieces in bulk, it gets cheaper. So that's essentially how they do it. It's because they're manufacturing in bulk. So if you're wanting a custom piece made, the reason that's going to be so expensive is because, one, obviously it's the maker's time, but two, they're not ordering materials in large quantities, so you know, that makes it more expensive. So that is where you are going to save money. If you're wanting to make a custom piece, I mean, essentially this is a custom piece for my new character for Empire. you are going to save money, because a custom shield or sword or blade or whatever it is that you want is going to cost you quite a lot. So yeah, definitely have a go at doing it yourself if that's what you want. So yeah, that's pretty much glued up. I've now got to apply glue to the next layer, so I'll do that as well. Right, so next layer of foam, and it's really important at this point, because my shield is asymmetrical, that I make sure I actually glue up the right side of the piece, because that would essentially be an absolute disaster if I did the wrong side, because I'd have to cut another one. And although I have got enough foam probably to do another one, it would increase the cost dramatically. So yeah, make sure that you've got the right side that you're gluing. Again, with shields, this laminating technique that I use, essentially it started just out of cost, really. So the first shield I made, I used thinner foam, so I actually think I used 5mm foam, because the manufacturer that I use, their minimum order is 2 sheets, 2 sheets of foam. So and then with postage, etc., etc., it does work out quite a lot of money. So I knew that I only wanted to make 1 shield, so I thought, well, I've got to order 2 sheets minimum. I don't really want to order 2 sheets. 1 would have done it. I'd have probably used 1 10mm sheet. So instead of having to order 2 10mm sheets and then end up with stuff I didn't want, I ordered 2 5mm sheets, and then I laminated it up in 5mm layers. It worked absolutely fine, but it was really, you know, had like, I don't know what it was, 6 layers of foam to glue together. So the increased cost of glue sort of neglected some of that slightly. But yeah, essentially it did save me money, because I used more foam, but of the thinner foam, and this is the point that I should have mentioned before, is the thinner foam is cheaper. So 5mm foam is considerably cheaper than 10mm foam. So that's why I did it that way. And yeah, it works out fine. It was just a lot more work. So I mean, you could essentially make a shield this size with 5mm or even 8mm foam and save a little bit of money, but you'd have to do more layers. And to be honest with you, with one this size, I would say it's probably not worth doing. I'd go for a 10mm. If you were doing a flat shield where you're not putting a curve on it, you could go even thicker, and you could probably just use 1 or 2 layers. You know, you probably want, if that was the case, you probably want 30mm foam as a minimum, I would imagine. Or you could probably do, I don't know, 2 layers of 12 maybe you get away with. I'm just speculating now. So there we are. Okay, so we're just carrying on with this. Like I said, this is the boring bit. Well, I say this is the boring bit. No, I lied to you. Latexing is the boring bit. The first layer is great. The last layer is great. The 10 layers in between those two, not so much fun. It's just a long process. If you're not patient, again, I wouldn't recommend making shields. Definitely, it is a long process. So It's already taken me a couple of weeks. Obviously I've got work in between, but it's taken me a couple of weeks to get to this stage. It does slow things down having to film it as well, mind. But yeah, so it's taken me a couple of weeks to get to this stage. You could do it quicker if you've got a few days off from work. I could have probably got one done in 3 or 4 days. But essentially, you're stuck with drying times. So first of all, the glue, which ideally, really, you want to leave to dry overnight once everything's assembled before you do anything else. And then, okay, so you need to leave that to dry, and the side to dry, and then we're going to stick those together. So try and get as much of the edge in place as I can before I let any more touch the next layer. And like I said, there's going to be some trimming around the edges. It's almost inevitable. Okay, so now you've got to really press this down. I think that wasn't too bad actually. I think I got it quite accurately done. It's really important to get a really good seal between the layers. So really give it a really good press in. Just don't want any air bubbles. So you just need to make sure that we've got a really good seal. I think I was pretty accurate with that layer. It's a little bit off on one edge, but honestly, hardly at all. So I'm really pleased with that. That worked really well. I just want to brush that off. So you can see already, well, I don't know whether you can, hopefully you can see already with 2 layers on now, it makes a massive difference in how thick this shield, or how stiff the shield is. So there's one more full layer to go on top of that. And then finally on top of that then will be the detailing. So yeah, let that dry and then we go on to the final layer. Okay, so that's the third and final full thickness layer on the shield now. So it's going to take a little while for this glue to sort of really stiffen up, but I think we can get the idea. I think you can get the idea of what it's going to sort of look like. I've also gone ahead and trimmed. I've gone ahead and trimmed around the edges just to even them all out. It wasn't too bad, to be honest with you. There wasn't much overlap, so it worked out quite well. So this is now quite a sturdy shield. As I say, once the glue has really gone off, then that'll be pretty tough. So there's one more layer to go on this now, and that is the sort of decoration piece that's going to go on the top. So essentially the actual sort of core construction of the shield is pretty much done. I mean, you could leave it like this, and that would be absolutely fine. And like I said, when the glue is finished, it will stiffen up. The nature of the fact that it is a full foam shield does mean that even though I've put a stiffener under this end is a little bit sort of floppy. But to be honest with you, once you get up to there where the sort of stiffener is, it's solid, and you should be able to parry your opponent's foam weapon strikes quite easily. Right, so I'm going to do the next bit now, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I've actually gone and redone the horse head design from my original first cut. The reason for it was that I was just, the longer I looked at it, the less happy I was with the overall shape. So I've gone and redesigned it. It won't make any difference to the shield itself. Obviously this is only for sort of decoration on the top, but yeah, I did have to cut another one, which meant I had to use a little bit more foam. We'd all make mistakes, so but yeah, it's going to be my own shield for my character, so I want it right. So I think this shape is a lot better. I'm going to be doing something slightly different with the mane, as opposed to the drawing that you may have seen on the top of the shield, which I think is gonna give it a better look. So I'm going to go and glue this onto the shield and then trim the edge up, and I'll show you that result once I've done that. Okay, so I'm cutting out the design for the horse's head on the top of the shield. So a quick tip, so that you don't waste too much foam where you're cutting very complicated shapes, or shapes that you might want to adjust a few times. Cut them out of cardboard first. That way you can get the shapes in the right. So this is cardboard. And once you're happy with the shapes, you can then use that as a template for your foam. It'll just save wasting a bit of foam there. So I'm going to finish cutting this and applying the foam details now. Essentially you just need to draw it onto the foam. So there's the head. Just draw it onto the foam and then glue them together in the same way as I've already shown. Just make sure you've got a nice thin layer of glue on each side. Make sure they're dry before you glue them together. Give them a good press, and then they'll be stuck on. So I'm going to finish off using these templates. As you can see there, they're just cardboard templates. Now to cut the foam, and then I'll lay the rest of the mane on the shield. So as I've said before, I've actually changed the design very slightly from the original one. I just think it looks better, and it just sits better on the shield. Sometimes you have to actually build the thing before you realise that you know, you might want to change your ideas. You know, until you actually see it in 3D, it can be quite tricky to know exactly how it's going to look. It's a bit different from the sketch that I originally did, but yeah, I think it's going to come together pretty well. So I'll just finish this off and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, so all the design is now stuck down onto the front of the shield. So there's really just one stage left to do, and that's to put an edge around obviously around the edge of the shield. So in a normal shield, this might be you know, a sort of metal band that holds everything together. So we'll be doing that as well. It just gives the edge of the shield a nice finish, and it also just means it hides the sort of lamination that is. Sorry, you can't see it very well. Here we go. It hides the lamination of the edge on the edge of the shield. So that'll be next. Is a piece of 3mm thick foam, and I'm going to mark out a strip that is 40mm wide. So I'm sure you've already guessed, the shield is actually 30mm thick. So this is going to give me 5mm, half a centimetre overlap either side of the edge, which, rather than it just being flat, gives it a little bit more interest. It just makes it look a little bit better. So this is where your different thicknesses of foam do come in, and they do come handy. If you've got a couple of different thicknesses, it does mean you can do things like this a lot easier. Pen is running out. Great. it does make things a lot easier. You could use 5mm, probably get away with that as well. So if you were constructing a shield fully out of 5mm foam, you could probably edge it in 5mm. You shouldn't have any problems with that. I think probably any more than that, and you'll have a little difficulty getting it just to go around the corners, essentially. If you're doing a square shield, makes no difference, I guess. Yeah, so I just find this is a lot easier. I also use the 3mm foam in constructing spears, with spear handles, so it is quite useful stuff. So yeah, there we go. So I've marked that, and I'm just going to cut it out. And this will give me a nice long strip of foam. I've used like the edge of a new sheet, just to give me that, you know, nice straight edge, at least on one side. So cut this out now, and then we'll edge up the shield once we've done that. This is pretty much the last part of construction. Let me just snap my blade off. So these blades I'm using, they're disposable, and you can snap them off like that, just to keep your edge really sharp. I've already, in the construction, gone through 3 or 4 blades so far. The foam, surprisingly, blunts the blades very, very quickly. And if you haven't got a sharp blade, it'll start to drag. So I just noticed it was starting to drag a little bit up here. So I've just snap that off, give myself a better edge. So I might actually need 2 of these, probably will. So it's going to go, obviously it's not going to go around the horse's head, but essentially this is going to go all the way around. Actually, I think I'm good for 1. Yep, so 1 will do. Yeah, so it's going to go all around the edge of the shield, apart from the horse's head. So I'm going to actually sand that that edge down, because I wanted it to, the head to stick out over the side of the shield, as if this is like a strengthened area. This will probably be metallic, so yeah, it was sort of used for catching swords on there. Well, that's my take on it anyway. Obviously it's a fantasy shield, it's not in any way historically accurate at all, so you know, I can pretty much do what I want with it, which is why I like LARP so much, compared to reenactment. Okay, so I'm going to glue this up and get this stuck on now, and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, so the glue's dry. Now we're going to get this edge tape onto the shield. Hope you can see this. It's not particularly interested. But the key with this one is to just make sure that the overlap, that you've got the little overlap on either side is the same all the way around. So I'll just trim that off. There we go. So I'm just going to trim that there. And there we are. So I'm going to sand this edge in a minute, give that a really good sanding, and essentially that is it. So if I can just raise this up, I'll show you the whole thing. So there you go. Foam construction's done. That's pretty much gonna. You know, once the latex on that as well. You know, obviously you would never hit this hard while fighting, but you know, it is absolutely, even right down the bottom, it's pretty good. So so yeah, that's the construction part done. So there's one last stage to do with this, and that's just run the heat gun over it. Like I said before, it just closes all the foam cells down. Yeah, we'll get that done, and we'll start on latexing. Okay, so I'm now going to run the heat gun over the foam. So you've got to be a bit careful with this one. You want it on the high setting, but just be careful you don't burn the foam or melt it. You just literally want to be running it over. I have gone over a little bit with the glue on these sections here, so that's actually going to turn brown once I run the gun over it. It isn't ideal. Ideally, I would have tried to keep the glue underneath the sections, so I didn't really want to do that, but I had a couple of mistakes with positioning. It's not the end of the world. It won't affect it too badly, but yeah, so I've decided I'm not going to put a wood grain on the shield. I'm going to leave it blank. I'm going to try and get a nice smooth finish on there. I think that this relief here is probably enough for detail wise, so yeah, I'm going to leave this blank, and hopefully I might do a fancy sort of painting or something on it. I don't know yet. It might be too much, but we'll see. Anyway, so heat gun. So just give it a couple of seconds just for the tip to heat up. This is quite hot, so don't put your hand in front of it. And what you want to do is you literally just want to run it over the surface like that. So the other thing the heat gun does, it also takes any little tiny burrs that might be left, takes those off, and just smooths everything down. Right, okay, so we're going to be latexing the shield. As you can already see, I've actually put 2 or 3 coats on it already. Unfortunately my camera is playing up, and I lost a little bit of footage, but honestly it really doesn't matter. So I'm using a roller. I've just changed the roller head. For something like this you're probably going to want to change head at least 2, maybe 3 times. If you don't, what happens is the little bits of dried latex build up on the roller. They then get put onto the surface of your project, and once little bobbles stick, you can't get them up. To be honest with you, using this sort of method, and unless you're spraying, there's no way really of avoiding it 100%. But by regularly changing your roller, you're gonna avoid most of it. So this is the latex. Just give it a bit of a shake, and pour some into this little sort of painting tray. Don't put too much in at once. I poured a load in once and then proceeded to spill it on the floor. so you waste the stuff. Also, you don't need that much in any one go, so it's just best kept in the can, really. So, as if you were just rollering your walls at home, I guess. Just make sure that you check the roller and there's no sort of bits and pieces on it as you're about to latex. Get a good covering really into the foam, and then away you go. Okay, so try and keep it nice and smooth. You don't want a very heavy layer. If it's dripping, you've probably got too much on there. And you're best off doing more layers are better. All right, so I don't think you can really ever have too many, unless you've got something that's got a lot of detail on it, you know, really fine detail. Then you've got the chance that you can lose that detail as the latex goes down. So yeah, just be aware of that. And obviously, unfortunately, I couldn't show you, but actually the first coat is quite an important one. You need to make sure that you're hitting everything on that first coat, so everything's got to be covered 100%. You'll find that you know, the latex sort of, it is liquid after all, it does pool into certain areas that are hard to reach, which isn't a bad thing actually, because it just means that it's, you know, if your heart's hard to reach, you need to get in those little nooks and crannies. I use the end of the roller to get into those little spaces. You can also use a paintbrush. You'll probably see me using a paintbrush in a minute, just to get into all the cracks. But certainly on the top surfaces, just use your roller. That's fine. What you don't want to do is leave any areas where it's sort of built up. So just make sure that you've re-rollered across those if there's any sort of residue left on the top, sort of like where I've been brushing here. So these little bits are quite tricky to get into, so it's a good idea to use a brush to get into those. Let's pay attention as well to where you've got foam joining foam, so like around the horse's head here, making sure you really get into that area, and of course just round the edge. Wherever you've got a join, make sure you really work the latex into those areas, because if you've got a little bit that's not covered, that's where it tends to start to come apart. So it's a good idea just to make sure that you've got all that covered, and then just go over it. So if you do decide you're just going to use a brush, that's absolutely fine. Just be aware you will leave brush marks. Again, that can be absolutely fine, especially if you're doing something that's like if you want it to look like it's been roughly painted, then that's great. If you're doing wood grain, I'd actually recommend using a brush, because it just adds to the effect. So yeah, definitely use a brush if you're doing wood grain. You know, so that's great. It's also actually a brush is quicker than a roller, without doubt. So yeah, I'm just going to carry on doing this, and I'll see you in a minute. Right then, so we've now got about 8 layers of latex down on the shield. So what we're going to do now is start to add a little bit of colour to the latex. So the first colour I'm going to be adding is going to be a black, which will basically give us an undercoat. So as I've explained in the video where the previous video, I just use liquid acrylics. These are System 3. They're very good. You can get them from any artist's shop. They come in these handy pot sizes. They've got a little snap close lid and a sort of little pouring spout as well, so you can get exactly the right amount in. So you don't actually need a lot of colour in the latex. It goes quite a long way. So I'm going to just be adding it to my roller palette here. We will need to get in there with a brush as well, just to get into all the cracks. So I've just sort of filled the little tray up to about halfway there, and I add a few drops of black. You don't want too much, because it will change the consistency of the latex. If you want to use powders, which obviously doesn't add any liquid to the liquid latex, you can do. There's a guy called L.R.P who I think put the link into the first video. Go and check out him. He uses powders. That's you know, I'm not going to go into that, because he does everything you need to know about using a powder colour rather than a liquid one. I find the liquid's fine. You know, as long as you mix it up really well, you're absolutely fine. So when it goes on, you'll notice that it's not actually black. It's a sort of grey. I'll show you this without absolutely ruining the shield. It's a grey. As the latex dries, it goes much darker. So don't think you haven't added enough. You probably have. It's going to come out a paler colour. So as you can see, the latex is white until it dries and then it goes clear. So it basically just changes the pigment, the colour essentially. So give it a really good mix, and then off we go with the roller. So make sure that, obviously, because you were doing clear latex before, give your roller a really good squish. Obviously we're doing black at the moment. Once we change colours, we will have to clean the roller, but I haven't cleaned this one because it's just gone from clear to the black. And we're probably going to need about 2 to 3 coats of the black to get it fully covered, which will take us up to about 10 to 11 coats of latex then. And then after that we'll be putting probably another 1 or 2 coats then of a different coloured latex over. So it's going to end up with about 14, maybe 15 layers of latex on the shield. So yeah, just like before, just carry on and use your roller to get a really good cover. Obviously at this point you now do need to make sure you're getting into all those little edges. It won't cover in one go. It'll be a sort of patchy. That's normal. You're going to need about 2 or 3 passes, like I said before, to get a deep black, which is what you want, because then anybody who paints sort of Warhammer models know that we do tend to work from a black undercoat, so that if there is any little bits that you miss when you're putting the colour on, it just appears black and not white, and so it's much less noticeable if you do that. And of course, once you've isoflexed, that's it. There's no going back. You can't really readjust your paint after that. You can paint on top of the isoflex, I guess, but it just wouldn't look right. Okay, so we're going to just get into all these little areas here. There you go. So all these bits, you are going to need to get in there with a brush. And these are the bits that are actually going to stand out if you don't. You'll be able to see where you I was trying to use a bigger brush, I think, just to get in there. Really get in there with those. Yeah, that's better. Of course, the other good thing is when you start your black layer, you see the bits that perhaps you have not got your brush into in previous layers. So any white bits that you've sort of left, you're going to notice that. And try and get rid of as many of the brush marks as you can. It's really tricky getting into those little areas there. But they're trying to get rid of the brush marks. So as I say, it looks great at the minute. When this sort of dries, it'll go to like a sort of streaky, patchy, dark grey. And then as you add the layers of coloured, it will become less and less streaky until it's a solid black. So I'm just going to go ahead and carry on doing this. And basically once I've got another 2 or 3 layers of black on it, I'll come back and show you where we are then. Right then, so we've got a layer of black on the shield now, so that's our undercoat. So now we're going to start adding some colour. So I am going to change my roller once again. I did rinse it out, but again, just to keep it as smooth as possible, where I'm going to use a fresh roller. Okay. So for this one then, I'm going to be painting the actual main body of the shield green. So like I've said before, it will take a few passes to get the colour on. I'm going to be using little Citadel pots of paint, mainly because that's what I have, and a little bit of the of white. So make sure that your paint tray is nice and clean and it's got nothing left in it, and then add in your colour. So you don't need a massive amount. It's probably not the most economical way of doing it. It's just that that's what I've got at the moment. I mean, these Citadel pots are quite expensive, but to be honest with you, I haven't got any. I didn't buy any green, so I got them lying about, so it's fine. And then I'm going to add in a little bit of black, because essentially I want quite a dark green for the first coat, and then I'll lighten it up as I go. So this is going to be the main body of the shield's colour. So I'm not going to worry about going over the raised areas, which are going to be a different colour later. That really doesn't matter, because it's easier to paint the raised areas than it is to get in here. So I'm just not going to worry about making sure that nothing gets on the top. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to be putting a different colour over that later anyway. So I'll just show you this once I've mixed it up. So it is quite a pale colour, but when you've actually got it on the project, it'll be much darker than that. It looks like a pale green. It's actually not. This is going to come out quite a dark green. So just be aware of that. It does darken up as you put it on. So I'm not going to bore you with me painting this time. I'm just going to apply this, and then I'll be back with you in just a second. I hope you can see that. So this is the sort of green colour I'm going for. It's quite a dark colour. It's still got to dry a little bit. It's quite tricky to see against the black because it is very dark. but it's going to contrast when I put the colour on the horse's head. So that is the aim. So yeah, it's just a little bit more work to do on that, and then I'll be doing the head. Right, there we go. So that's the final colour, pretty much. I wanted to go for like a sort of ancient bronze shield. So the green is a sort of verdigris type effect. It's not very, you can't see it very well, I'm afraid, in this light, but there we go. So yeah, it's sort of turned out quite well. So there's one step left to do, and that is to isoflex it. So I will be going over that in just a minute, and that'll be about it for this build. Right, we're at the last stage. Okay, so I'm going to be isoflexing the shield. So painting's finished, and the last bit to do is to actually isoflex. So isoflex is this stuff. It's a special primer. It's designed for flat roofs, but essentially what it is, it's a very flexible coating, waterproof, and it's going to protect your shield or whatever it is that you're doing with it. The only problem with it is that it's not nice stuff to use. It stinks, and it's quite dangerous, really. So before I even open the tin, I'm going to be wearing a mask. It's not a great one, but it's fine. It does the job. You need a mask, brush, and of course gloves. Once you start doing the isoflexing, I recommend that you make sure you finish the whole thing in one go, and don't try and do half and another half unless it's really awkward. I mean, with a shield like this, you could actually do the front and the side, and then leave it to dry, turn it over, do the back, and then redo the side. So there's a good join. You could do that, but I don't like opening this stuff for any longer than I have to. So I try and do it all in one go. So what I've got on the back is got a wire that's just wrapped around the handle, and that will go over one of my brackets that I've got hanging up in the shed, and that will, it won't matter about the handle because I'm going to wrap that in leather afterwards, and that will just hang up to dry then once I've done it. Okay, so here we go. If I sound a bit muffled, it's because I am wearing my mask. I'm also going to open the door, even though it is raining outside, because we're approaching E2, so of course it's going to rain now. So anybody who's watching this before E2, hope you have a great time. Unfortunately, I can't make it, but as you can see, I'm busy doing stuff for Empire anyway. Right, so gloves on. Another thing is make sure that when you use this stuff, you put the lid on really firmly. It's quite difficult to get on and off. It sort of forms a sort of vacuum because of just the amount of fumes that are coming off that. It's not good. Anyway, so just make sure your room is really well ventilated. So I've already shaken this up, and I'm just going to brush it on. Now, Isoflex is quite a thin substance, so you can happily use a brush. You're not going to get any brush marks from it. So just give it a really good coating. It's really important though that you do cover everything. Try not to leave any anything pooled. You don't want big pools of this, you want a nice, even, thin coat across the entire surface. If you do miss bits, you can go back, once it's dry, you can go back and just touch those up with a little bit. I try and get it done first time, to be honest with you, because I hate using this stuff. It's really nasty, so I try and not miss any bits. So you might see me going over the same bit several times, just to make sure that I have got everything covered. It's really worth sort of taking your time getting this right. Like I said, I really don't like the stuff, so it's best if you can get it all done in one go. So I followed the recommendation of one of the YouTubers that I've previously looked at about Isoflex, and he said to do just one coat and don't be tempted to do more coats, and the reason for that is that it dries with a very slight yellow tinge. One coat you won't notice it. If you apply more than that, then you can start to see this yellow tinge. It wouldn't make too much difference on this shield, to be quite honest with you, because it's green and gold, and you know, yellow wouldn't really affect it. But if you're doing something like a silver, that can really affect the colour, and you get a sort of yellowy, silvery colour, which I would imagine it's not very good. Okay, so I'm fairly happy. That's the front of the shield done. Again, I don't want to get any pools. So you can see it's actually quite a quick process, but it's probably the one that I dread the most, to be quite honest with you. It's my least favourite bit. But also, funnily enough, it's also one of my favourite bits, because it means that what you've just been making is almost done. Right, I'm just going to lift this up now and grab the handle from behind and undo the edge. Pretty much all of it covered. So I'm going to hang this up now, and then I'm going to do the last little bit, which is just where I'm actually holding it, which is by the handle. There we go, that's a bit better. Yeah, so like I was saying, it's fully Isoflex now. Honestly, it really is strong stuff. So, although I said you could potentially do this indoors, really don't. You need to be outside, because it would stink your whole house out, even with the doors and windows open, to be honest with you. So yeah, do not use it inside. Even with the door open on my shed, it still smells. So I'm just looking for areas that I may have missed. Too much. Okay.